Hey y'all, welcome to the final sidebar of season 1. What a ride! And we're just getting started. For this sidebar, I want to do something a little different. I'm going to do a breakdown of the final 2 chapters, but I also want to do a real how did we get here moment. And in order to do that, I think it's necessary to go back, like back. But let's put that on pause for a second and cover these chapters real quick. The last sidebar covered chapters 21 and 22, She Knew and Hardship. At their conclusion, you found out that Mom knew what Ron had been doing all along. Shelonda got pregnant. Mom evicted her as a result of the pregnancy. Sharon had been Ron's victim, and Shelonda had an abortion and moved in with Sharon. By all accounts, it looked like things were looking up for Shelonda. So where did it all go wrong? Well, because Shelonda did what Shelonda does. That's why. Chapter 23. The signs were there. Shelonda had a good thing going at Sharon's. She had a safe and comfortable place to live, a job, and she was able to visit Ken while he was in jail. Sidebar to the sidebar. That whole ID thing was legit back in the day. Like you could really use somebody's ID, like a side profile ID, and people wouldn't even notice. But anyway, when Ken came home, there were no limitations on when Shelonda could see him. Everything could have just stayed the way it was. The reason why I said that Shelonda did what Shelonda does is because she allowed Ken to come in and make a decision for her, just as she always did. All he had to say was he wasn't comfortable with Shelonda being around Sharon's boyfriend, Antonio, and Shelonda followed his lead. She moved in with Ken against Sharon's strong advice to avoid growing up too fast. But by that point, Shelonda already felt as if she were grown. Everything was fine until Ken stayed out too long, and Shelonda asked questions. For the second time, Ken got violent with Shelonda. The first was when he raped her on her bathroom floor. I think it's telling that Shelonda reverted back to her trauma with Ron in that moment. When Ken tells her not to ask questions as long as he's paying the bills, she accidentally says, "Yes, Daddy," because that's what she was forced to say to Ron. Not even realizing that that was the point of reference, an intoxicated Ken smiles and says, "I like that." The next day, Ken did what Ken had always done. He made breakfast and started the process of making it up to her, just as he had done when he got caught up with Melanie, and just as he had done after the rape. Ken talked Shelonda out of going to work that day. Eventually, she agrees not to go back at all, and in doing that, she placed Ken in a dangerous position. If you think about it, Shelonda was probably 17 at that time. Yeah, she was 17. She met Ken when she was 14, on the first day of her freshman year. At that point, she was about to enter her senior year, and she hadn't acquired one single friend since she met Ken, other than Sharon. Sidebar. The one friend that she had prior to that point, Tasha. She had basically severed ties with Tasha for the benefit of keeping her relationship with Ron a secret. My point is, Shelonda was very motivated by relationships, even at the expense of losing people who were important to her. She had dismissed Tasha's friendship for Ron, and she had quit her job at the salon for Ken. But anyway, back to chapter 23. Shelonda placed Ken in an excellent position to monopolize her life. She had gotten out of reach of the one person who probably would have checked on her, and that made it easy for Ken to do whatever he wanted. Ken purchased a cell phone and a car for Shelonda, so she felt that she was being taken care of. Keep in mind that this was commonplace for her. It's a mental pattern. Ron had started the process of being abusive towards her and then buying her things. By her own admission, love and hurt were very much intertwined in her mind. Fast forward to a month later, and they have the Labor Day party. After what seems to be a great night, Ken beats Shelonda because he sees her talking to his friend, Omar. during the party. And when I say that he beats her, I mean he violently beats her, kicking her in the face, pulling her hair out, and everything. And instead of leaving, Shelonda searches her mind for what she could have done that could have been misconstrued as flirting. As usual, she finds a way to assess a portion of the blame to herself and decides that she shouldn't have allowed Omar to be alone with her. Ultimately, she decides that she just has to be more careful in the future, but that obviously doesn't work out. Shelonda says that she ends up spending the first part of her senior year being absent more than she was present due to bruises and exhaustion, so they were obviously fighting a lot. She had begun to contemplate suicide. The only thing that kept her there was Grandma's assertion that a person couldn't go to heaven if they committed suicide. That's a heavy burden for a 17-year-old. And that leads directly into chapter 24, ending and beginning. Y'all gotta understand how my mind works. I'm a visual creature. Things literally play out in my mind and I can see them. Like, I know what these people look like in my mind, and scenes play out like when I write them or when I read them. So please know that I have had extreme emotional reactions to certain things that I've written about. Like I've cried and gotten joked on about it. Not just in this book, but in other books too. But in this project specifically, I was very much affected by the rape and the violence that took place. That's not stuff that I'm typically affected by. I think it's the fact that she's a child. But what took me by surprise was how bothered I was by narrating Shelonda's discovery of her grandma's death. It played out in my mind, and I watched her fall onto her knees, scraping them on the frozen ground. That felt super impactful to me because, as a mother, how dare you? Hadn't she been through enough? Shelonda already had to deal with being touched by Ron, and eventually raped and impregnated by him. The mother, who was tasked with protecting her, kicked her out after realizing that she was pregnant. Then, knowing the relationship that she had with her grandmother, she didn't even inform Shelonda of her passing. She took all of the insurance money with the full knowledge that the grandmother had intended for Shelonda to have a portion. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, she refused to take Shelonda's phone call after months of not hearing from her daughter and not knowing where she was or anything. But to Shelonda's credit, she understood that she had bigger fish to fry. Grandma had left her a house, so she knew that an out was provided for her. Shelonda knew that she needed to leave Ken's house. She didn't really want to leave the relationship. She just didn't want him to have that control over her. She calls the police to make sure that Ken wouldn't fight her as she was trying to leave, not knowing that he had warrants. Of course, she shows up just in time to see him getting arrested and to watch him cry, because that always dug deep for her, and she felt terrible. For the second time, Shelonda felt that she was at fault for Ken getting arrested. The first time was when he attacked Ron. Factually, she wasn't at fault for either. Ken had drug charges, and he had a probation violation because he was supposed to do an anger management program after he attacked Ron, and he didn't. Either way, Shelonda assigned some of the blame to herself, of course. She packs her stuff and retrieves the keepsake box that she had placed in one of the closets. It's the box that Ken gave to her that day that they were at the lake. This is the first introduction to the extreme relevance of the keepsake box. To quote, "I took a moment to view the contents. The things in that box triggered so many memories. Included were pictures of me and Ken, pictures of Grandma, and pictures of Cassidy. Also included was the Monica cassette tape that was given to me by Tasha, the Whitney Houston tape given to me by Ken, and the brooch that was given to me by Grandma, the same brooch that I wore to my disastrous first school dance. Inside of a plastic sandwich bag was the positive pregnancy test that I had taken on the day that Mom tried to kill herself. There was a small Bible that I had received from Grandma. I ran my fingers across her handwritten name on the inside. That was the first time that I understood the monumental impact that the keepsake box had on my life. The items inside evoked so much sadness, but I found it incredibly difficult to part with any of them. I placed Ken's house key in the box and closed it. I walked away, knowing that I was closing a chapter of my life that I couldn't ever reopen. This will become more impactful as the story goes along. Ultimately, Shelonda moves into Grandma's house and finishes high school against all odds. She takes a job at a gas station and is solely responsible for taking care of herself. She feels good about doing things on her own and getting her life on track, but she mentions an unforeseen complication that changes her life for the better and for the worse. She mentions that a familiar face walks in and that he's about to become her new Ken. And if you've been following her pattern of behavior, you can probably guess that season 2 will be full of Shelonda's bad decisions. You would not be wrong. But the twists and turns in this next season will blow your mind. There are going to be some new characters and some old ones as well. But you absolutely do not want to miss this next season. And to be honest, it was my favorite book of the 3. Book 1 was my least favorite. Okay, in other news, I mentioned that I wanted to go back, so I probably have to explain something. I realize that some of you may have missed out on something that was probably essential. Moment of transparency. Y'all may not know this, but I was winging this thing. Okay, y'all probably do know that. But anyway, there was some real trial and error with this thing, specifically in the beginning. I actually recorded a trailer for this podcast, but because I wasn't aware of some of the settings, it didn't get posted on all of the podcast networks. By the time I figured out how to fix it, I realized that there were people who may have started listening that never heard the trailer. I actually went in and fixed it today because this sidebar made me realize how important it was. However, if you're hearing this, I know you're probably not going to go back and listen to it. So to that point, I want to play the trailer for you guys. If you haven't heard it, bear with me. It was my very first recording, and it's a bit low and glitchy as I was still playing with the sound quality and such. But I think it's important that you hear it. So mind your business and turn it up. I'll discuss it when it's done. Who are you? Who am I? There's a very complicated answer to a seemingly simple question. I am Shelonda. I'm Londa if you know me from my hometown. Shelly if you know me in a professional capacity. I'm also Star if you know me from the part of my life that I've tucked away. I am young, accomplished, and married to the perfect man. I intermingle in the classiest circles, and I've traveled to some of the most beautiful places in the world. The problem is that description is so very generic. It is in no way indicative of who I really am. That's my surface life, the life I choose to present to the world. My identity has always been tied into someone else's, always trying to simultaneously fit in and stand out. So who am I? Well, why am I would be a better question. I've given a considerable amount of thought as to why I'm the person I am, and I believe that I've figured it out. I don't think we give enough credence to the fact that we're all shaped and changed by what happens to us. Regardless of how insignificant certain things may seem to someone else, key events and situations have monumental impacts on who we ultimately become. Each life-changing event adds itself to our emotional keepsake boxes. We all have one. Some people carry that box for the entirety of their lives and use its contents as excuses for why they followed a certain path, because that's easy. To some degree, it's comfortable, but what happens when that's no longer the case? What happens when the very things that have made you comfortable start to contribute to your demise? We'd all like to think that we could easily dispose of the things that no longer serve our purposes, but can we? Is it really that easy? What things are in your emotional keepsake box? What would it take to make you let them go? The reason why I found it important to place a random trailer in this episode is that's what this whole thing is about. Shelonda acquires a keepsake box. She starts to collect physical items inside that she's attached to. But you realize that she has an emotional keepsake box that is simultaneously becoming cluttered as well. But that's her, a fictional character. The trailer asks, who are you? A better question is, why are you the person that you are? Factually, we are all shaped and changed by what happens to us. All of those things have monumental impacts on who we ultimately become. And we add those things and experiences to our emotional keepsake boxes. Some people really do hoard feelings and experiences and use them as reasons why they have to be them. But what happens when being you starts to work to your detriment? What things are in your emotional keepsake box? What would it take to make you let them go? See you in season 2. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Chinney Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.